The Black Rose McQueen. I wanted to give a shout out to Ring IQ Boxing, and remember to tune in to the motherfucking relay.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Danny Garcia had this to say. He says, if Pacquiao wants big money, pay-per-view buys, I'm the perfect guy to fight. Portion of the article reads, Danny Garcia discussed the importance of opposing Pacquiao during the most recent episode of the PBC podcast, which debuted Wednesday on PremierBoxingChampions.com. He's quoted as saying, I think that'll be, the biggest fight that Manny, if he wants the big money and he wants the pay-per-view buys, I feel like I'm the perfect guy to fight. Who's gonna meet that, Garcia told co-hosts Kenneth Buari and Michael Rosenthal. But it's up to him. He's the legend, and that's the fight I really want. I thought it was going to happen in the summertime, but he fought Diamond. And it is what it is. But I'm here, If the legend wants to fight, then let's get it on.
Okay.
And I have to say that in the realm of big money and big pay-per-view buys, I'm not sure what Danny Garcia is drawing all these conclusions from, it being that Danny Garcia's never actually been on pay-per-view.
His whole career.
So, what facts corroborate that kind of a conclusion to where Danny Garcia feels that he's bringing big money and big pay-per-view buys to the table when both of those aforementioned factors have more to do with Manny himself and less to do with Danny?
I don't know.
If you think about what options are on the table for Manny Pacquiao and which one of those options would be the most lucrative option, it really wouldn't be Danny, as Danny is not a pay-per-view star, nor has he ever been. He certainly doesn't have the command of the Puerto Rican boxing fans that a Miguel Cotto had or a Felix Trinidad had.
No way.
Danny's never reached that point to where he became the face of Puerto Rican boxing here in the States. I mean, he just didn't,
It's the truth.
You think about what options are on the table for Manny Pacquiao, here and now, and which one of those options is the more lucrative option, and comparatively, whether we're talking about a fight here in the States, on a pay-per-view, or we're talking about somewhere else in the world, abroad, to whoever is willing to host the fight for the most money. I have to say that comparatively, the more lucrative option for Manny Pacquiao, regardless of where the fight takes place, would be a Mikey Garcia over a Danny Garcia. As Mikey Garcia, he actually has been on pay-per-view before, and we see what the effect of having his name on a card has as opposed to the name of someone else. I mean, you'll notice that the buy rate for the Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence fight is actually more than the buy rate for a Sean Porter Errol Spence fight, in spite of the Porter fight being the much better, more competitive, more entertaining fight. Mikey's fight with Spence brought in more buys, brought in more people in attendance.
It's the truth.
Facts by the numbers, folks. So if we had to compare Mikey to Danny, the more lucrative option really would be Mikey, not Danny. Whether you're talking about a pay-per-view here stateside or a fight somewhere else in the world, like Saudi Arabia,
Wink, wink.
Mikey can help Manny bring in more money than Danny could. You compare the fan bases and what kind of reaction they get here stateside, and the Mexican-American fans stimulate the buy rate of a pay-per-view more so than the Puerto Rican fans do, because Puerto Rican boxing really ain't what it used to be. You ain't got a Miguel Cotto, a Felix Trinidad, or a Wilfredo Benitez floating around.
You don't.
This ain't your father's era of boxing. Because in your father's era of boxing, the Puerto Rican boxing scene actually had a face, whereas in this era that we're currently in, the Puerto Rican boxing scene doesn't have a face. Some thought that the heir apparent would be Felix Verdejo to pick up those reins, but that's just not how things panned out. And Puerto Rican boxing here today in 2020 doesn't really have a face.
It sure ain't Danny.
Not in all the same ways that Mexican boxing has a face in Canelo Alvarez, has a face in Mikey Garcia, and several other boxers that have been doing very well for themselves. Thus, if the goal is to maximize earnings and maximize profits, a Mexican boxer really would be the way to go. A Mexican boxer or a Mexican-American boxer, like a Mikey Garcia, because Danny Garcia, comparatively, does not have a hold, does not command the Puerto Rican boxing fans the same way that a Mikey Garcia commands the Mexican and Mexican-American boxing fans. I mean, I'm not trying to convince you that Mikey Garcia is a megastar or a household name so much as Mikey will help you sell more pay-per-views, help you sell more tickets than Danny could. I mean, why do you think Mikey Garcia ended up on a pay-per-view ahead of Danny Garcia?
Why do you think that happened?
the Mexican-American boxing fan's presence is felt, and it reverberates throughout the sport of boxing. I mean, a guy like Canelo Alvarez, how do you think he got to the point to where he has the most lucrative sports contract? Emphasis on sports contract, as in all sports. How do you think he got to that point? It's the Mexican-American boxing fans, their support, and their presence. Thus, if you want to stage a pay-per-view in America and you want it to do well, a Mexican boxer or a Mexican-American boxer will help you a lot more than a Puerto Rican one would, especially one like Danny Garcia, who doesn't actually have the inside track on the Puerto Rican boxing fans, at least not as much as a Felix Trinidad did, a Miguel Cotto did, or a Wilfredo Benitez did. I mean, it's just the truth. That's just reality.
Danny ain't the face of Puerto Rican boxing.
With Mikey Garcia, you got a better shot at selling some pay-per-views here in the States and selling some tickets. But the pool of options with Mikey aren't limited to what you could do here in the States, because lest we forget, very recently Mikey Garcia was in bed with Eddie Hearn. You know, his last card was a Matchroom DAZN card.
Against Jesse Vargas.
And it just so happens that Mr. Eddie Hearn has the inside track on the Saudis who are very eager to stage big fights, big events in Saudi Arabia for big money, obscene money, the kind of money that might be to Manny Pacquiao's liking. That being said, it's pretty obvious that Mikey Garcia is actually the more lucrative option over Danny Garcia, but that's not all, folks. If we go as far as the pool of options over there on the PBC side of things, even there, Danny's not the more lucrative option. Errol Spence would be the more lucrative option, as so far he's made 2 appearances on pay-per-view, whereas Danny's made none.
Zero.
Danny's been around a while now, you know. He's fought the likes of a Lucas Mathise, an Amir Khan, a Zab Judah, an Eric Morales, a Keith Diamond, a Sean Porter, yet he's never been on pay-per-view.
Errol has.
An Errol Spence fight would be billed as a unification match for 3 of the 4 world titles in the welterweight division. There's that much more on the line, that much more intrigue, and that much more incentive for the American boxing fan to purchase the fight. As far as PBC fighters go and what options are on the PBC side of the street, an Errol Spence fight would be a more lucrative option for Manny than Danny. And if we rank these options from most lucrative to least lucrative, Danny sits at the bottom. Mikey Garcia would be the most lucrative option out of these 3 options, as you have the option to stage the fight as an American pay-per-view for an American audience, or you could stage it abroad in Saudi Arabia for big Saudi Arabian money. Mikey would be the most lucrative option, with Errol Spence being the second most lucrative option, and Danny's somewhere down there at number 3 as the least lucrative option of those 3 options. There's selling yourself, and then there's being delusional, and I think very much that Danny Garcia is being a little bit delusional here. I don't think he's being honest with the paying public, and I don't think he's being honest with himself.
Nope.
This is the same Danny Garcia that was last in action against Ivan Redkach, the same Danny Garcia that needed 12 rounds to beat Ivan Redkach by way of a points decision. Same Ivan Redkach who was stopped in 4 rounds by John Molina and stopped in 4 rounds by Dejan Zlatijanin. Danny needed 12 rounds to beat that guy. Sorry to say, but Danny Garcia, he's just not pay-per-view material.
He's not.
He's not pay-per-view worthy. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking to yourself, well, neither was Chris Algieri. I mean, Chris Algieri wasn't pay-per-view worthy. No, he wasn't.
Nah.
But that was up to Manny the same way that this is up to Manny. That decision, who makes it?
Manny does.
It's Pacquiao, and right now, given Pacquiao's age, the stage of his career he's in, a Mikey Garcia fight may be a more attractive fight for Manny than Danny. I mean, neither Danny or Mikey, they're not the busiest, most prolific punchers. Both have good boxing skill, good boxing acumen.
They're solid.
But they're not physical fighters. They're not rough and tumble guys. These aren't guys that go out there throwing a whole volume of punches. They're not those kind of fighters. So if you got to choose between one of those 2 guys who have that similarity, that constant, you're going to choose the guy that can get you the most money. And that guy, that's Mikey Garcia, not Danny. Danny's best bet, his only hope at this point to make an appearance on pay-per-view is an Errol Spence fight. And that's if Spence picks you.
He might.
So I reiterate, there's selling yourself, there's that, and then there's being delusional. And I think that Danny is being a little bit delusional here. There's nothing about Danny Garcia that spells big pay-per-view buys or big money, because as it stands, he never actually has been on pay-per-view, has he? No, he hasn't. Mikey, he has. And when it comes to Mikey, Yeah, this to say, he says Pacquiao can't complicate things like Spence because he's smaller. I would love that opportunity to fight Manny, Garcia told promoter Eddie Hearn as part of an Instagram live interview on Friday. I think styles, make fights. And he's not this tall, lanky fighter that can complicate things like Errol Spence did. Errol Spence is a tall fighter who uses his reach very effectively and height. And, he's a southpaw, which always complicates things. Spence stands at about 5'10", approximately 4 inches taller than Garcia. The 5'6" Pacquiao and Garcia are just about the same height. Manny's still a southpaw, but he's a lot smaller in size, Garcia said. So he's shorter in height, doesn't have the reach like some of these other welterweights. So I think that fits much better to get an entertaining fight with me. And I think it just fits right. The 32-year-old Garcia and the 41-year-old Pacquiao are mutually interested in facing one another once the coronavirus crisis ends. Opposing Pacquiao would not only guarantee Garcia a huge payday, it'd give him a chance to become a 5-weight world champion. I remember sparring him years and years ago, Garcia recalled, and I was able to fight in the way similar to like Eric Morales or Juan Manuel Marquez, boxing, and we did very well. It was only sparring sessions, but I felt good. I was able to time him, I was able to use my jab effectively, and that's why I think the fight makes the best sense right now, to prove to everybody that I can be a world champion at the welterweight limit. Now, I don't know how you guys out there have this fight. I don't know if you guys out there have Mikey winning the fight or Manny winning the fight, but there definitely is truth to what Mikey Garcia is suggesting, that because Manny Pacquiao isn't as statuesque a fighter with as statuesque a frame as Errol Spence, it is a different situation, it is a different fight in spite of both Manny and Errol fighting out of the southpaw stance. Yes, they're both southpaws, but they don't mirror each other in terms of dimensions or implementation. It is a different fight.
He's right.
But with Manny, Mikey wouldn't have to fight his way around the long jab of what is a more statuesque southpaw. With Manny, both guys will be at eye level. And as soon as one attempts to get mid-range to inside on the other, it won't be as hard for Mikey to get off punches of his own, as he won't have to fight his way mid-range to inside before he can start letting his hands go. Whereas with Errol, it is a different situation entirely. It's a different situation entirely when you have a statuesque fighter who uses his jab to get inside on the other guy, that he can fire that jab safely from the outside.
Coming in.
Get the smaller fighter on the defensive, and as he's pumping out that jab, he's inching closer towards that smaller fighter who's on the defensive, doesn't want to let his hands go for fear of what may come back at him, allowing Errol Spence to dictate the pace and the space of the fight. Just as well, Errol, being the more statuesque fighter with the longer arms and the longer legs, give him longer strides. It's that much easier for Errol Spence to step in and out of range on a smaller fighter who has to get mid-range to inside before he can do anything. With Manny, that's not the case. Put simply, Errol Spence's generous physical dimensions have a lot to do with why the fight for Mikey was so difficult, as Errol can throw straight punches from a safe distance, outside of Mikey Garcia's striking distance. And as he's throwing these straight punches, a guy like Mikey has no choice but to cover up. And once he covers up, that allows Errol to take the initiative and start coming forward, start putting pressure on that smaller fighter. That smaller fighter who, if he's smart, stays on a defensive, doesn't open up, doesn't give the bigger guy very many opportunities to land clean punches, because if he does, that could be lights out. That's the situation, or that was the situation with Errol. With Manny, it's a different situation, because Manny's got to get close to you to hit you the same way you've got to get close to him. So perhaps Garcia can make a Pacquiao fight a bit more competitive than an Errol Spence fight was. However, there are certain things that need to be addressed when it comes to Manny Pacquiao. That, yeah, he's a southpaw like Spence is a southpaw, but these guys, they got different implementation. Manny Pacquiao's trademark bounce. It makes it kind of difficult for a orthodox fighter to keep his lead foot on the outside of Manny's lead foot, because Manny's bouncing in and out of range. You're trying to keep your lead foot on the outside of Manny's lead foot to perhaps fire straight right down the pipe, and the problem is that he's moving back and forth. He's bouncing out of range, and when he bounces back into range, his lead foot might end up on the outside of yours, allowing him to land a straight left, to land a power shot by veering off to his right, staying on the outside of Mikey's orthodox jab, and allowing Manny to fire that straight left in between the guard, right down the pipe, smack dab on Mikey Garcia's face. Just as well, Manny's trademark bounce also allows him to bounce back in and stay just on the outside of Mikey's orthodox jab and come over the top with a jab of his own, as establishing the lead foot and making sure it's on the outside of Manny's lead foot is difficult when he's moving back and forth the way that he does. It makes it difficult for the orthodox fighter to set his feet and land a power shot. I mean, I know that many people look at Manny Pacquiao's size and think to themselves, this guy's got to get within striking distance for him to do anything.
It's true.
But Manny is more elusive than he's given credit for. I know that defense has never really been Manny's calling card, that it is his offense
Known for.
that's his bread and butter. But his offense can prove tricky, as he is a bouncy, fleet-of-foot southpaw. I mean, southpaws in and of themselves can be very frustrating fighters to have to deal with. But just imagine a southpaw that's constantly moving, constantly bouncing in and out of striking distance. And once he bounces into striking distance and lets off a shot, it's not just one shot. It's a combination. A combination from a very strong puncher who, if you're not careful, can put you down and cost you the round. Mikey Garcia might be thinking to himself that, you know, Manny's slowing down, and because he's slowing down, he might be that much easier to time throughout the course of the match. Time him as he's coming in to fire off a big right hand, what is often referred to as the southpaw killer. A punch that southpaws, if they're not careful, they are susceptible to. This might be what Mikey is thinking to himself, that at some point, Manny might slow down enough that I can catch this guy clean with a power shot. And because he's an aging fighter, he may not be able to weather the blow. Essentially attempting to mimic the success of Juan Manuel Marquez in his fourth fight with Manny Pacquiao. But that's just it. If it were that easy, everybody would do it. Juan Manuel Marquez, he can't be your model. He was in the ring with Manny 3 times prior to knocking him out. So he approached that fourth fight with a lot of experience in dealing with Manny Pacquiao. Whereas Mikey can't say that. I mean, if it were easy to catch Manny Pacquiao with a big right hand, we'd see him get knocked out a lot more often. But as it stands, since that Juan Manuel Marquez fight, you haven't seen these orthodox fighters knocking Manny Pacquiao out, now have you?
No, you haven't.
The wild card here is Manny's age and the ravages of time. Whether or not Manny Pacquiao will get old overnight, the same way that some people think Gennady Golovkin got old overnight with Sergey Dianchenko. That's something neither I or you will know until the night of the fight. And that's what makes it, perhaps, a more competitive fight than the Spence fight was for Mikey Garcia. That has to be the train of thought. And in that way, Mikey's actually right, that he might stand the fighting chance against Manny Pacquiao that he didn't stand against Errol Spence. Because 1, styles, as we all know, make fights, and 2, Father Time is undefeated. He catches up to everybody. Perhaps he'll catch up to Manny Pacquiao.